Hey guys, today I want to share with you a story that is a local story, but I think it really has global implications. And as far as the systemic parts of it, which I'm going to address, I really want to make an appeal to young farmers to change their mentality about government intervention in our sector, agriculture. So the story in particular, I'm going to have the link below, and there's actually a petition to help this farm. They're called Cran Log Ales, and they're a fantastic organization that practice amazing, sustainable, organic practices, and they grow their own hops on their farm to produce their ale. And it's a fantastic product. This company has been a huge inspiration for many young people who get into the sector, and myself as a consultant that has consulted for hundreds of farmers across the world and many in British Columbia, I have spoken with many young farmers that have been personally inspired by these folks. But this farm is at risk of being shut down because of a policy change within the Agricultural Land Commission. So I won't go on to the details of that. You can look at the article below. It's a relatively short article, but I want to talk to the broader and more systemic context of this issue. So first, let me just give you a bit of background history on what the ALR and the ALC are, because they are outlined in this article, and many of my viewers who don't live in British Columbia will find this necessary to understand the context. So the Agricultural Land Reserve was a government program set up about 40 years ago to protect agricultural land in British Columbia, because they were noticing that a lot of that land was getting gobbled up by developers, and then some of the prime agricultural land was disappearing to development, and so they were worried that in 50 to 100 years there'd be nowhere else to farm in British Columbia because it would all be developed. So it was a well-intended program, and I know a lot of good people that work in these organizations, and I don't want to discredit them or their intention, because I do know they have good intentions. So the Agricultural Land Commission is the governing body that basically controls the ALR. And the commission basically sets the rules of what you can and cannot do on land within the ALR. So a local context here in the Okanagan Valley where I live, there is a lot of farmland. A lot of it's protected by the ALR, and so there's orchards in the ALR. There's some market gardens in the ALR, and there's a lot of wineries in the ALR. And so the ALC will make rules to say, okay, you can and cannot do this on ALR land. And a lot of wineries that are in the ALR, they actually have kind of special privileges, primarily because they have a big lobby. And I'm not opposed to that whatsoever. I'm all for the winery industry. It just so happens that the winery industry makes more money than orchards or small farms. And hey, nothing wrong with that. That's just free market, right? But the problem is that their special privileges given to those who have more money than those who don't. So if you're in the ALR and you're a farmer like myself, say I'm farming 5 acres of land, and I would like to do what some of the wineries do. They've got restaurants that I sell to. They've got wine shops. They're allowed to sell alcohol that's not even produced on their farm. They can do those things while being in the ALR. Whereas a farm like myself can't. I can't start a restaurant on my farm. I can't sell alcohol on my farm. I can't have certain kinds of tourism on my farm. I can't have weddings on my farm like a lot of the events that wineries can do. And so it's unfair. It creates an unfair playing field where it creates a benefit to those with the money and power to influence it. The other thing that happens in the ALR is that people can actually get their land out of the ALR. And so if you go in the Lower Mainland, the area around Vancouver, the greater area in the valley, and you look at these mega mansions that are on ALR land, some of them have gotten their land out of the ALR because basically what developers do is they buy this land and they have enough money to just lobby the local ALC branch to get it out of the ALR. And so some of them do that, and because of that, the land that's in the ALR actually pretty much just reflects fair market development land. And that means that why would anybody buy ALR land if you're a farmer if it's worth $2 million for 2 acres? Like, who's going to farm that kind of land? So what this does is it creates an incentive that favors the rich, because big developers can buy up huge tracts of land and sit on it for like 20 years and pay the taxes on it, and eventually they get it out. And if they get it out, it's a huge payoff for them, because not only do they get to, if they sell it, they can sell it to a developer who's going to put in a condominium and they get a big return on investment, or they develop it themselves and get a 20-to-1 return on investment. So it creates a playing field that's unequal. And what this has actually done has made it almost impossible for young people in British Columbia to buy land because it's so expensive. And the ALR has effectively been part of this, because nobody will buy ALR land if they don't think they can get it out of the ALR at some point. It's only big developers that will buy it because they know they can get out. So it's created this weird marketplace that is skewed to reality. And you can't blame people for wanting to sell their land at fair market value. Like even in the Okanagan Valley here, there's a lot of orchardists who have been farming for 30 years and their kids don't want to take over the farm. And they just want to sell it at fair market value, but they can't because most people won't pay fair market value for agricultural land. It's just not worth it. So now we've got an environment where young people can't get into farming and older folks who want to retire can't get out. And so we've got this deadlock environment that isn't cyclical. And Joel Salatin writes about this in many of his books. I cited him in my last video like this, but he talks about a real sustainable agriculture needs to have a cycle where young people can get in easy and old people can get out. And we don't have that. It's a deadlock. And so young farmers can't buy land. So a personal story I have with the ALR is I was farming on a piece of land a number of years ago for 3 years, and I wanted to save my landowners the tax by demonstrating to the ALC that I was producing a lot of product on this land, and I was for a small piece of land. But the problem is the ALC stipulates that there's different criteria for different sizes of land. So larger pieces of land, for some weird reason, have to show less revenue generated from that land. Meaning that what happens is rich people buy that land and they'll just plant a bunch of alfalfa. They'll hire some contract farmer to come in and mow it once a year, just like basically mow their lawn, turn it into a bales of straw that goes to horses, to people's horses in the area, and then they get their tax write-off because they produced $2,000 of product. So whereas on the smaller lots of land, so there's smaller ALR pieces of land, they actually have to show a higher production value. They have to show $10,000 or more. I forget what the exact number is, but it's something like that. And so if you don't produce that revenue on that land, you can't get your tax write-off. So I went through weeks and weeks of paperwork to do this, till somebody in the ALC finally said to me, well, you know, you actually just need to do this and this and this. And I couldn't because I wasn't farming enough of that land. Though I was producing more on this tiny piece of land I was farming than people that were farming on 10 or 15 acres were. It wasn't enough because of the stipulations and regulations that the ALC set. So after all this paperwork, going into the ALC office, talking to agronomists and bureaucrats back and forth, my landowners got a check 1 year later for 97 cents. It was an absolute joke and a complete waste of time. So this is the kind of thing that is just, it's disincentivizing agriculture, it's disincentivizing small farmers. So this program of the ALC, which is in effect set up to help farmers, or at least help future generations of farmers, has done the opposite of what it was intended to do. It's actually keeping farmers out. And so the problem, kind of circling back to the article about Cran Log, the problem here is that the ALC just isn't up to date with what is going on in agriculture today. And I think there are two primary systemic reasons for that. The first reason is people who work in bureaucratic offices that govern a certain sector or industry, they don't have the know-how or they're not up to date with the latest information in that sector because they don't actually have skin in the game. So if you really want to learn a sector, you don't go to a government office to ask information about it. You go to the people who are in the front lines of that sector and you see what they're doing, because innovations are happening every day. And because those entrepreneurs have skin in the game, meaning that if that business fails or succeeds, they are accountable to that failure or success. Whereas a bureaucrat who just regulates that sector gets a paycheck no matter what happens in that industry. So the bureaucrats have no skin in the game. That's reason one. The other reason is that bureaucrats who regulate a certain industry are always the last to know, mainly because of a simple reason, is that people who work in that industry have no incentive to keep the regulators or who are the taxers as well, up to date on what the new innovations are, because it actually is to their innovators' detriment. Because it's like take the story of Robin Hood, for example, the sheriff of Nottingham, who is the villain and is effectively represents the idea of government in that story, comes around and asks for tribute at the end of each harvest for the peasants. And so what incentive does a peasant have to let a person who is essentially a thief to know that they can obtain 4 times the yield on the same amount of land, when that regulator is going to come through and say, well, now I want 4 times the tribute, right? So for that principle alone, this is the primary reason that governing bodies are always the last to know, because nobody has an incentive to let them know. So it's skin in the game, and the fact that these organizations are essentially tax thieves that prevent all these sectors from being up to date. And so in the case in Cran Log Ales situation, they're being accused, or the ALC is saying that this farm needs to produce more of their barley, even though Cran Log is saying we don't actually need to use that much barley in our alcohol, and it's a small ingredient. But the ALC is the last to know, because who wants to tell them? So this is a systemic problem with these government programs, and the reason I'm taking the time to make this video is because I'm in this for the long game, guys. I'm a young farmer, and I've worked with hundreds of young farmers around the world, and I'm trying to help people succeed. That's my job as a consultant, is to go in and assess a situation, help them problem solve, and help them succeed. That's what I want to do. But programs like this are continuously running down new farmers, and this is where we come in as young people. This issue is not going to change in the next election, and we're not going to be able to vote this out right away. This is going to take a long time for this stuff to change, but it's going to take time because, in my opinion, culture actually changed politics. Politics is downstream from culture. We need to change the culture of the day. We have become a nation that has been very fortunate in our ability to produce goods, and we're sitting on mountains of wealth created by previous generations, and that has afforded us many luxuries. But what it's done, it's kind of made us lazy in a way, and we have turned into a culture of consumers. Most of us live in cities now, and very few of us, or less of us, live in the countryside. And if you look at the way the production and consumption maps lay out in any country, whether it's the United States, Canada, or anywhere else, you'll see that producers, generally speaking, live in the rural areas, and consumers, generally speaking, live in the urban areas. And this consumptive attitude where most of us live in cities has created a culture of dependence, because we've become very comfortable in the mass-produced goods that afford us this amazing quality of life. But this is working to our detriment. And politicians get elected by promising free stuff to people. And it's an easy way to get elected, because who doesn't want free stuff? We all want free stuff. We all want an easier way of life. And that this circles back into this idea that we've become a culture of consumers, is we appeal to free stuff, and so politicians get elected on that promise. And so this hurts us as farmers, because the more we take of these free promises, these sort of like carrot sticks they dangle in front of our face, they also work against us, because it's short-term payoff for a long-term debt. And these types of programs in the long term are not going to work out for our favor, because they're going to regulate our industry so much that we're going to stagnate, because we're going to lack innovation. And if you look at the most productive or industries that are the most innovative, they're the least regulated, whereas the industries that are the most regulated are the least innovative. So more innovation in, like, say, software and technology. This is where all the young people are going into. There's the least amount of regulation because it's hard to regulate, whereas industries like the medical system are like these slow-moving glaciers that take forever for policy to change in. And if you know any nurses or people that work in the industry, I know hundreds of them, they get really burnt out from the slow-moving, dilapidated system that it is. And so there's a primary example of overregulation stifling innovation. And that's what's going to happen in agriculture. If we continue to vote and ask for them to give us grants, create programs to help us, we're inviting them into our space to regulate us. And none of these programs are free, you guys. Everything the government creates only comes from the involuntary extraction of wealth from individuals. Governments cannot create value without theft. They can only create it through taxation. So the more we ask them for free stuff, the more they're going to tax us, the more they're going to regulate us. And if you want to see this continuing arc of farmers getting out of agriculture, we have less than 2% of people in the world work in agriculture today, and the average age of a farmer is over 60 years old now. I think in Canada it's like 65. So if you want to keep this arc up where less people get into farming and less people farm, and there's more people going out of it than are coming in, then this kind of policy is going to be the exact type of thing that's going to continue that arc. So I would encourage young folks around to look at the information. Don't take my word for it. Do your research on the ALR and the ALC and decide for yourself. But I will tell you that I oppose these kinds of programs. I don't think we should have even a Ministry of Agriculture. It shouldn't even exist. Let farmers decide what is best to do on their land. If government wants to be involved, they can help manage property rights and things that they were initially set out to do. But I really believe we need to change the culture on this, you guys. And that's my message. Please read the article, sign the petition for Cran Log. But we do need to address this at more of a systemic issue. And that is my message for the day. If you want to see more videos like this, please hit the subscribe button, like the video, share it, get the message out there, and we'll talk to you later. Have a fantastic day.